Hello, my name is Dan Egel. I'm the vegetables disease specialist for Indiana. I work in the botany and plant pathology department at Purdue University. I am located in the southwestern portion of the state where there's a lot of cucurbits grown. Today I want to talk about a cucurbit disease update for 2021. So today I will talk about a couple of emerging diseases which I feel like have been important in the last few years and I expect to be important this coming year. I will talk about management strategies for those diseases, and I'll give a couple of fungicide updates for some new, just two new fungicides that have been recently labeled, and I'll end with some resources so you can look some stuff up later if you want. So the first disease I'll talk about then is Anthracnose of watermelon. You see on the left that there's jagged, angular, rather dark looking lesions with yellow halos around them. These lesions can be severe and defoliate the plant, and in that case, when the vine's defoliated, it can cause a loss of fruit quality and a loss of yield. But as you'll see on the right, you'll see lesions of anthracnose directly on the fruit. Obviously, this will cause yield loss. But in addition to this, smaller lesions, especially when they occur on the bottom of the fruit, can be easily missed, loaded into your truck, and they can cause problems post-harvest. This is Anthracnose of Cantaloupe now. You see the lesion on the leaf on the left, a cantaloupe leaf. It's not as dark, not as jagged looking, but still anthracnose can cause a defoliation of cantaloupe in severe cases. And on the right, you'll see lesions of anthracnose directly on the cantaloupe fruit. My experience is that there are some cantaloupe that are more susceptible than others, some varieties. So anthracnose of cucurbits, my recommendations are scout transplants, whether you're growing them or receiving them after a shipment. Scout them for symptoms of anthracnose. The disease can come in on transplants and can come in on seeds. So you want to use seeds that have been tested for anthracnose. Crop rotation is important because the disease can last on crop residue in the field. Fall tillage is important. Apply fungicides prior to disease. In most cases, I would apply fungicides by the time vines touch within the row. I recommend a 7 to 14 day schedule, more frequently when the weather has been rainy and when it's been drier. You can spread those out to every 14 days. If you're interested in using a weather-based disease forecasting system, at Purdue we have the Milcast system, and I'll have a website you can visit, or you can ask questions about this later. Fungicide applications via Milcast, you'd use a weather-based system instead of a calendar-based system. So this is systemic. This chart here, table is the systemic fungicides recommended for use of anthracnose, fungicides that would move within the plant then. So you have on first column is your trade name, your product, then your active ingredient, your FRAC or mode of action group. FRAC stands for Fungicide Resistance Action Committee. And then your re-entry interval and pre-harvest interval is included here. So you see here that there's a lot of group 11s listed. Group 11s are largely effective against anthracnose, but you want to avoid using group 11s back to back in sprays in sequence, and we'll talk about how to avoid that in a little bit. But you'll also notice that Thompson here is on my recommended list, and it's a number 1. There's also some fungicides which don't move in the plant, fungicides which are what I call contact fungicides, which will be effective if they contact the fungus on the surface of the leaf. So first we have products with the active ingredient chlorothalonil, and then products with the active ingredient mancozeb. Both are in an M frac group, which means that they you can spray those back to back in sequence, that is, without worrying about causing fungicide resistance in the pathogen population. So if you wanted to make the body of your sprays a contact, for example, this is from May to June, kind of a simulated spray schedule here. So you have Bravo in red here, sprayed all season. In this case, we've decided to put systemics in twice. We've decided to use the systemic product Pristine. It has 2 active ingredients, a 7 and 11. And so we're not spraying it back to back. We're spraying Bravo in between there. Or if we wanted to use 2 systemics back to back, here we have Pristine with frac group 7 and 11, and then tops in group 1. You could put those back to back without worrying about fungicide resistance. So Phytophthora blight of cucurbits is the next disease I wanted to talk about. Phytophthora causes nasty looking lesions on watermelon, often starts at the bottom, and that's shown here. It can cause large lesions like this or smaller lesions which you could miss and perhaps load into your shipment. But Phytophthora does not, for the most part, does not cause any problems on the vine itself. So that'll affect the timing of when you have to spray for Phytophthora on watermelon. On the other hand, Phytophthora blighted pumpkin not only causes a lesion on the pumpkin fruit, as you see in the right in the lower corner, but also on vines, and you see the vines dying there from Phytophthora. So for Phytophthora blighted cucurbits, I recommend crop rotation, whereas a 2 to 3 year rotation is good enough for Anthracnose. Probably a longer, at least a 4 year rotation is better for Phytophthora. It has a long-lived spore, which long-lived in the soil. Avoid peppers in the rotation because peppers are very susceptible. Water management is critical. Use well-drained fields if you can. Avoid those fields that have spots which puddle. Use raised beds if possible because the water will run off. Drip irrigation is preferable to overhead irrigation. Apply fungicides prior to disease, and we'll talk about that in a moment here. Especially fungicides, the fungicides which are effective against Phytophthora are not necessarily the ones that we'd spray for Anthracnose, gummy stem blight, or powdery mildew, for example. For watermelon, since the disease does not affect vines, you don't need to start applying fungicides until it gets to about the softball stage. Then with pumpkins, since it does affect the vine, I would apply your first fungicide at least by the bush stage. After that, and by the bush stage, I mean when the pumpkin plant is grown up, but before it starts to vine. After that, you can kind of go by the weather a little bit. Milkcast does not work for Phytophthora, but certainly with rainy weather, the disease will certainly be worse. So systemic fungicides recommended for Phytophthora blight of cucurbits are shown here. Same as the last table. The first 3 I would be products that I would recommend using at what I call the softball stage for watermelons, or for pumpkins the bush stage. So that would be the phosphorus acid products shown here, Actigard or Forum. After that, you would want to alternate using the rest of these products shown here. And I'll talk a little bit more about these, but I'll just point out here that several of these have a group 40, and you would want to avoid 40s, great, but don't use those back to back. Don't apply group 40s back to back. So here, this is some examples of just how you might rotate these. This is based on a study we did a few years ago. The first one takes Zampro and alternates it with Arondis Ridamil Gold. The Ridamil part of the Arondis Ridamil Gold Some isolates of Phytophthora are resistant to ridamil, but since it's a tank mix of the Arondis product and the ridamil product, you'll be okay. And in addition to that, you're alternating it with Zampro. The second option is to alternate Rebus and Presidio all season long. And then the third option is a little bit more complicated. Use ActiGuard first, then a tank mix of Ranman and the ridamil Gold, Presidio, Illumin, and then the final one would be Arondis Gold, ridamil Gold, or Arondis Ultra. Now this is complicated, but my feeling is that in general, the more modes of action you get in there, for the most part, the better. Now the first one, the ActiGuard, I'm suggesting here you could substitute Forum or one of the phosphorus acid products there instead of ActiGuard if you want it. So I mentioned water management, and you see here on the left the watermelon field, which has water between the rows. This is the kind of thing you want to avoid, because this will can cause Phytophthora to be quite severe. On the right-hand side, you don't see water in the row, but you can see by the caking and cracking on the soil where water has stood, and you can see that the pumpkin vines have died there. And I should mention that if you're going to put raised beds and plastic on, then that you want to make that plastic domed so the water runs off. And just a sanitation suggestion: this grower has taken watermelon and his cull watermelon, put them back in a production field, and the red arrows indicate some of these watermelons have Phytophthora symptoms. So the next time that grower goes back in this field, Phytophthora may be even worse. So watch where you put those cull watermelons. You want to avoid putting them in anywhere close to a production field. A couple of recent fungicides that have been labeled. Gatton shown here for powdery mildew of cucurbits. I show a powdery mildew on a pumpkin leaf and then watermelon fruit. Normally, powdery mildew is worse on pumpkin than watermelon, but it's something to watch on watermelon as well. I show the active ingredient and the REI PHI information here. FRAC group U13, which is new, which is recent, and we're always looking for new modes of action for powdery mildew, because fungicide resistance can be a problem with that disease. The other one I wanted to talk about is Prolivo 300 SC for powdery mildew. I list the active ingredient and the REI PHI information. FRAC group 50, which is relatively recent, and it's silent for greenhouse use. So if you want to use the greenhouse use, silent means that you could use it in the greenhouse, and if you wanted to use it, that would the crop you'd probably want to use it on would be cucumber, and some cucumber varieties are susceptible to powdery mildew. Finally, I wanted to show some resources. The Midwest Vegetable Production Guide is shown here with the website, the URL, mwvegguide with 1g.org. We will not be producing hard copies this year because of the pandemic, but the guide is searchable on your phone or on your computer, and if you want to download a guide, I can walk you through that if you give me a call, and you can download the whole thing or portions of it and then print it off for yourself. But I can help you with that. A couple fungicide guides are listed, and the websites for these are listed. It tells you kind of what fungicides that I think should be used, but then also the order that those fungicides should be used. If you want information about Melcast, you can ask me questions at the end of this presentation, but melcast.info is the website that you would want to visit in season. And then I list 2 extension bulletins that kind of put in writing some of the things which I've talked about here for Anthracnose and then Phytophthora of cucurbits. And then finally, my contact information is shown here, and I'll be glad to answer any questions at my email or my phone number, or if you have any questions now, I will be glad to answer them.